here's my goal is to let Robbie lead by talking about his questions or interests in long form play. When what happens when we find ourselves playing for many sessions, almost like a way of life. You might not even think of ending or not, maybe. And also, just to be clear, we're not necessarily talking about intending it for it to be that way. That's like another variable, right? I mean, it might be involved. So that's what I got, Robbie. Why don't you go ahead and I want people to talk about the times when they have played, for lack of a better word, indefinitely. And it seemed to be fun. You know, people were into it. You were doing this on purpose. So, Robbie, you want to orient us a little more?
Yeah, I thought maybe I would just start by talking about some immediate experiences that I've had. I'm a few months ago, I was introduced to the game Masks, and my first time playing it was in a 2-session convention setting. I just this past weekend finished a series of Masks that ran over 2 months, but with a designated ending. The idea was we were going to play this for 2 months, and we played diligently every week. We met for 3 to 4 hour sessions. Okay, and then I'm also involved in a Champions Now game, which has been going on for a while, but that has like this indefinite ending to it. Okay, it is ongoing. We're having fun. Who knows how long that will continue. And, I guess, somebody on the outside could look at this and say, okay, the difference, you have these similar types of games that are going on, and the difference is they might say quantitative, right? You have different lengths of time that are going on. But, I've just been struck that it's not just quantitative, that there becomes a kind of qualitative difference in these games depending on how long the duration is, that my experience at the table becomes very different. What I'm focusing on, what I see as the kind of goal or purpose of play, I think changes distinctively based on how long the game is lasting. And I guess I would also say that I am curious about the way the actual rules of the games allow for certain types of long form play, and to what extent the rules are either kind of dictating a kind of play that would happen in a kind of long-term setting, or perhaps the way that they are giving advice about like what is the goal of long-term play. I did also went back to the classic AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, and I was struck here that this is such a hodgepodge of different sections, but he does in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, he puts the section on kind of character leveling up right next to the section on campaign and how to set up a long-term campaign, which I thought was kind of deliberate on his part that he would put those two, because I think he's thinking about the long-term stretch. But it also strikes me that the goals of those two sections kind of communicate very different things about what the purpose is. Right? On the one hand, the purpose here is to level up your character and get invested in that idea, whereas what he says concerning a kind of campaign and kind of setting up a world and having kind of social and political issues that are kind of swirling around the characters kind of sets up a different idea about what the end of long-term play might be.
I'll play that role that everybody hates and say, thank you, Robbie. Who would like to contribute an example of their own experience of playing for, we all know it wasn't indefinite, but it was played as if it was indefinite, or felt that way, or felt open-ended and went on for a long time? So, whoever.
Yeah, I can, at least from my earlier experiences in playing Telebout, when we played, we had a gaming club when I was in my early 20s. So a while back until late teens, early 20s. And we had like a pool of characters and a pool of game masters. And it just, we just came every Friday, every Saturday evening, and maybe in between, just when people had time, to have games with those characters. So there was a character continuity. It was a sort of shared world we had, where everyone had on a map a piece of the map, and they did their own adventures in there, or they used ready-made adventures from TSR or whoever made the stuff at that time. And it was not something like we went there to have fun those evenings and to see where the characters would go, and not so much have a preset plan for the longer term play, except maybe to have an adventure, or let's go back to the castle there, because maybe I was game mastering. I had a set adventure, and it didn't have a setting, and it didn't have a beginning of a story and end of a story, but you would just go there, and in between sessions I might update restock rooms, or think of what might have happened now that the top level is totally cleared. Would there be someone else coming in, etc. So it was not a planned long-term play, but it was I would say it came about organically. And I think we played like that for a bunch of years until people moved out, went to have the reason we stopped doing that was more for out of game reasons, for like people moving off to study elsewhere, to get work or whatever. Then there was an in-game reason, or like that, if that makes sense.
So others?
Yeah. So if I can, so from my point of view, and so if this is a little bit of a, if it's not that relevant, feel free to stop me. So I've kind of stopped trying to get long-term campaigns going, because I realized that I don't really like that. So the last time that I did it kind of consistently was back in high school, when everybody had a large amount of free time, and we were playing Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, and that tended to go. That did go on for a while, because I don't know exactly why. I guess we could think about it, why that went along for a long time. But I think the biggest factor was the fact that we didn't really have a problem scheduling all of these sessions, and that the situation, our situation of like how our time needed to be managed wasn't changing that much, because we were all going to school, and to the same school. While nowadays I don't feel that this, like for an adult or a person that, I mean for myself, I don't feel that I can run a campaign this long, or that I even want to. And so every time I start something, I always try to say something like, yeah, we're aiming for this amount of sessions, more or less. Not saying that we will force the story to an abrupt end if it does, but that's kind of what we're aiming for. And then people are on board that, okay, so we're about halfway through. We've done like 5 sessions of 10, so everybody is like on board that we start to solve things rather than create new questions.
Okay, this brings up a couple of interesting points. One is this is not an unusual thing for all of us, or many of us, to say, which is that the length of the time we spend playing a given game with people, or a given group of people, is externally determined. It's all lifestyle. It's all scheduling. And I just want to bring up a couple of interesting counterexamples, which is that there are groups who are so into their game or identify with it so strongly or feel it's important enough to them that they literally gather from all over North America once a year, and they spend one weekend playing, and that's the game. They've been doing this for over 25 years. They all played, or a bunch of them played together when they were younger, and they just decided not to let it go. And I know that sounds kind of extreme, but it does happen. And another interesting thing that I've experienced, to now throw myself in, and I want a testimony from one of the guilty parties to help me here, because because I just by request and by some inclination, I said, it's time to show some people plain old fantasy role playing. And so I looked around. Robbie, you'll be interested to know that I almost grabbed Dark Earth, but chose not to, only because I didn't know the rules very well. And I wanted to just sit down and hit it. And so I grabbed tried and true, RuneQuest second edition, which I kind of really, really, really feel strongly about these days. And was aiming at 3 or 4 sessions. And as many of you know, we're 14 sessions in to a game that is, even if it ends soon, still has that feel of we're keeping going. There's no sense of closure. And I'm focusing on this not just because we like the content, but because socially, it's jumped up in priority. We're making time for it. If we have to juggle time for other things, we do it, but that doesn't disrupt. We say, okay, next week we'll get back to it. And I encountered this before in the late 80s and early 90s with Champions, where even if we didn't play regularly and even if schedules were disrupted, the sense of, okay, and we're continuing to do this occurs. It's very different from playing games where you simply say that the definition of playing is that we will continue to play infinitely, which was kind of the assumption for most of the early games. You will play infinitely. And not to conceive it that way was considered sort of weird. Why would you stop if you didn't have to? So many of us came into role-playing with the assumption, you would tell people, they would say, you're telling them about role-playing, and they would say, when do you stop? When is it over? And you would say, oh, it never ends. That's one of the features. It never ends. Of course, they thought you were crazy, but that was what we told them. So I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying you assume that it won't, so you just don't. But I'm talking about intrinsic factors that are involved. And also, it's hard not to idealize it. You're like, well, that's when it's hit. That's when it's a good game. Because there are lots of games I like that do formally end. So, Helma, what did we do? How did this happen?
Well, I don't actually remember that I requested some fantasy setting. I think what I said was that I would like to play a game that has an end, or that we finish, because we didn't. I still haven't finished any game. But, however.
That's kind of interesting. In this quest for a game that would end, we ended up not ending. Right.
Yeah, and it wasn't a request for an end for that particular game, just to make sure that we don't misunderstand each other. Mm-hmm. I think what happened was we were still looking for people to join us. And so we started off with 2 people, me and Nate. And then the next session, some more showed up. So we were 4. And I actually think after the 4th session or somewhere there around, we asked ourselves whether we want to continue or not, because it became clear not everybody will be able to be there every time, and that might be a problem. And well, not everybody may want to continue, so we made sure that, well, everybody wanted to continue, including the poor game master who had to set up new things for us every other weekend, or every week
More
at
cults.
that time, I think.
I made up a new cult. Damn, now I have to actually write it up and like put stuff in it. Right.
I remember some comments like that, but they weren't really sounding serious enough.
No, I've been thrilled by the whole thing. Terrified, but thrilled.
Same. I think that's same for everybody. So actually by now, we had one person moving out of town and out of the group, and we had another one moving into the group, and I don't know how many of you guys are watching those plays, but the group is changing, and still it works. And I can say why. I think we are all as curious as everybody else how this will continue, what kind of world this is. I mean, I'm playing RuneQuest and never set my foot into Glorantha. Right. So the world doesn't have a name. Nothing in there basically has a name aside from the gods. Yeah, and that's where the priority lies. I think we are trying to explore things that are more philosophical than physical, maybe, even though there are times at which things get very much physical, but the all over feeling is this is a world that wants to be lived in.
Mm-hmm.